Local election headquarters.
Valley Congressman Devin Nunes is now embroiled in a new controversy on Capitol Hill. Did he spend more than $60,000 of taxpayer money to meet with a former top Ukrainian prosecutor to seek political dirt on the Bidens? Our panel ready to weigh in. Let's take roll call. News Director for GV Wire, Bill McEwen. KMJ radio host of the Afternoon Drive with Philip Teresi, and community leader, activist, and former Fresno City Council candidate Tate Hill. Gentlemen, welcome. Happy post-Thanksgiving. Appreciate you guys all being here. Philip, I want to begin with you. KMJ, Congressman Devin Nunes loves KMJ, always on it. Should he be investigated here? Following the bombshell report by CNN and the Daily Beast, he allegedly used taxpayer money to fly to Vienna with 3 of his own congressional aides, so they say, to meet with Victor Shokin. This is almost a mirror image of how impeachment hearings started for President Trump, it seems like.
Except for 3 little letters, CNN.
Okay.
Look,
and
they jumped up and the Daily Beast.
They were the ones to first break it.
We saw everybody jump up and down and yell and scream, oh my God, he went to a basketball game. That was inappropriate. They investigated. They found no wrongdoing.
Celtics tickets.
Exactly right.
All right.
Devin Nunes is a scrupulous, ethical guy. The fact that he is the target du jour in the middle of this impeachment hearing by virtue of his seat at the podium doesn't mean that he's corrupt and doesn't mean these investigations go anywhere. It's the Democrats wasting money, trying to smear Nunes. I'm not even sure they're doing it. As far as I know, there's no viable candidate running against him this time. But this is just more political theater to take away from a very neutral set of testimony we've heard so far.
Tate, are you believing the spin that Philip gave, or is it CNN, Daily Beast actually reporting the truth here, or are they delivering a report that is twisted?
Well, right now we don't know, and so until...
So that means you don't believe the CNN report?
Well, but I think we need to do some further investigation and see was there anything that the congressman was doing there that needs to be further investigated to see if there was any wrongdoing. And so what we have found out in many cases, things are not always what they appear to be, and until you get more information, you just don't know.
But, okay, Bill, I got to ask you, he hasn't really denied that he went to Vienna, and he hasn't denied that he actually met with Victor Shokin. So is he swimming with the sharks here?
Well, this falls in line with what the representative has done, really, since he's been on the House Intelligence Committee, and he kind of has appointed himself to be a junior G-man and go out and investigate these things himself. I'd be very interested to know what funds were used, and as the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, has considerable power to investigate things. So I find it an interesting story. I would also caution people that there's a story written on what people say about other people doing certain things. Is it worth the House of Representatives looking at? I would say, yes, it is.
Philip, then I want to come to you. If it is proven, I know we got to see a lot of things for that to happen.
That's a big if.
Okay, but what if it happens? Is he now President Trump's fall guy? I mean, we know Rudy Giuliani could be that guy, but is Devin Nunes now that fall guy for President Trump? I know that sounds crazy to think, but it is Capitol Hill.
As Bill pointed out, as the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, he's got a certain amount of authority and leeway when it comes to investigating things. There's nothing that prevents him from traveling. There's nothing that prevents him from meeting with people that are of interest in the course of his duties, or people who are just of interest. So if we go all the way through this thing and find out that he did take the trip, he did have the cup of coffee or the meeting, and he did spend money, whether it's out of his own pocket or as an investigation, there's still the question of, so? And as far as
if he tried to get political dirt on the Bidens, isn't that quid pro quo?
It wouldn't be quid pro quo because Devin Nunes and Donald Trump aren't playing out of the same sandbox on this thing at all.
And there's nothing Devin Nunes can hold back from the Ukrainians that I know of at this point. So
there's nothing that he can hold back.
It wouldn't be quid pro quo.
There's nothing that he can hold back from the Ukrainians, and there's...
Except for the aid after President Trump knew about what was from the whistleblower. So if he knew from Devin Nunes' meeting, hey, we need to investigate the Bidens. Now we're holding back that aid. Isn't that all part of it?
That's an
I'm just throwing it out.
It's an interesting idea,
Okay.
and it is an incredible reach that assumes a lot of malfeasance on the part of two very high-profile, highly scrutinized people.
Not saying that it happened,
But I would point out that Representative Nunes has connected more nebulous dots than this to construct some of his own conspiracy theories.
All right, I do want to get to this a couple of minutes.
Want to respond to that one?
We'll leave it there. We got plenty of time. But a bombshell report here coming out, because I want to switch gears to the DMV. Vice.com released an article that highlighted a document obtained by Motherboard, where they investigated how the California DMV is now taking more than $50 million from personal information over the last 6 years. That's each year, about $50 million they roll in off our personal information given to other commercial companies and requesters. How disturbing is this, Tate?
Well, given how high our DMV fees are, it's really concerning. And then, I think it's the question of, what are they doing with the money? Is it going to the general fund? Is it going to DMV?
Nobody knows.
No one knows, right? Could it be used to make the line shorter? If it was doing that, then maybe I'd be a little less concerned.
This is disturbing because we have to worry about our personal information being stolen each and every day. It seems like the DMV is just handing it over, Philip.
Well, there's a set of laws in place that the DMV is supposed to be following. There's the question of what are they doing with the money, which is a really huge question, but even more so is the question of why would a quasi-government agency be selling information that private citizens are required to provide to private entities for any reason at all. We've got Mark Zuckerberg in front of the Senate explaining why they're doing it. DMV's turning a buck on this, and it took Motherboard to dig up the fact that it was happening at all.
It's more than a buck, and I'm going to throw something at you, Bill, because I got a minute. Should California drivers, knowing that there are laws in place, DMV is privy to give some of this information out, I get that. But if we find out something more sinister, is there a class action lawsuit brewing somewhere?
I don't think you have to wait for something more sinister. And I say that because I don't remember when paying my DMV fees or registering a vehicle or anything else, marking a big X that say, I agree to the terms and conditions, including the release of my private information. So expect to see TV ads from the same people that are doing the Roundup ads right now.
Expect to see that certain box that you talked about on a given application anytime soon.
Right.
All right, guys, we have a lot more to come. And still to come is Fresno's biggest problem, the homeless crisis. We're going to sit down with the new CEO of the Pavarello House to get a better perspective on the state and what they're actually doing to fight the battle.